Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first episode of the State of the Christian Workplace podcast. I've got Giselle Jenkins with us today, our consulting director. Hello, Giselle.
Hey there.
Hey there. We're excited to get this podcast going. Recently, you may have seen that we launched a new report. It's an annual report called the State of the Christian Workplace Report. We kind of realized we've got a treasure trove of data that we have accumulated based on surveying tens of thousands of employees at Christian-led organizations. And we thought, well, we understand from a micro level, working with ministry partners, organizations, what's going on with their workplace culture. And we thought, what if we aggregated all of that and looked at all sectors combined, and also looking at the data for sectors such as churches, parachurches, family services, higher ed, Christian schools, businesses, and so on. And that's kind of the genesis and the reason for our report. But Giselle, you were part of that process of helping us kind of put this report together. What have been your thoughts so far on the data and kind of how that all came about?
Yeah, well, we've been telling stories, Rob, for a long time. We've been telling stories to our partners. And the longer that we've been around, the more information we've collected. And they love the stories. They love hearing it. And they've started to ask us very frequently, so what do you see as a trend? What do you see happening? What do you see happening in my sector? And we're able to answer that because we've been relying on our data that we've collected, and we've been relying on our partnerships with Seattle Pacific University to help us have this great data. And at the same time, we haven't been showing it to people. And so, we had the revelation, hey, why not go beyond the story? We know the story's true. And in today's environment, lots of times you hear stories and you think there really isn't any basis behind that. So as you're looking at this report, you realize, oh my gosh, there is such a basis behind it. So I'm excited to show people the basis behind the stories, the story behind the story.
Yeah. And that the story behind the story ultimately has a basis in data, but that data really reflects what we know God is revealing to us, and in terms of what works and what kind of action planning organizations can undergo to improve workplace culture. So I'm excited about not only the report, but talking with you about, some of the low-hanging fruit, some of the things we have initially discovered in our first annual report. By the way, you can grab this report and download it on our website, workplaces.org. And just go to our homepage, and there'll be a link there. You'll see it where you can download this first annual State of the Christian Workplace report. The report looks at a variety of different categories, such as overall engagement health for all of our sectors combined, and then individual sectors separated. Also data around level of engagement, employee net promoter scores. We've got relative weights analysis for our flourish drivers, things like that you'll be able to look at, hey, what's going on in my sector, whether you're a church sector or a higher ed sector, Christian schools. So it's really, really packed with a lot of good information, and you can see kind of collectively what's going on in the state of the Christian workplace. But one of the things that we noticed right out of the gates with this report was our report shows that when you combine all of the sectors, that 58% of employees at Christian-led organizations are engaged. And we kind of looked at that and compared it with Gallup's data, looking at organizations in the United States and also Canada, which shows about a 31% of engaged employees across the board. So it kind of begs the question, why are people more engaged with Christian-led organizations than, in the secular space? I'd love to explore that topic with you. Any thoughts just come to mind with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we call this life-giving work. And so very often you'll go places and you'll see posters. For example, if you're going to get a cup of coffee, you might see a poster up at the coffee shop, and it's going to have a picture of of a woman and her small child. She might be holding the child's hand, and she's carrying something on her head, and you see the coffee growing in the background, and she's smiling, and the child's smiling, and you feel like, when I bought this cup of coffee, I changed the world, right? And that is a whole strategy that the coffee shop is using to justify your $7.99 cup of coffee, right? And you feel good about it. Well, how about in Christian-led organizations with these amazing missions? Do they have to put the poster up about the coffee? No, because the very work is life-giving. So when we think about the workplace, and we think about, when I go to work, I'm a part of something that matters, is a mission effective, there's amazing life. And we find that when people jump into ministry work, they're looking for that desperately. And we know through correlation analysis that when they get it, it's an amazing engagement factor, right? But they don't have to manufacture it. God puts it right there as the opportunity for them in their everyday work. So just that alone is a powerful driver. So so that's the first thing that's coming to my mind, Rob, because we hear it again and again. Once I've done this mission work, once I've done this, I really can't go back, because I feel my connection to this mission and my connection to what God is doing.
Yeah. So it's a God calling. It's a higher engagement level. Do you think that also plays into the idea of kind of missional alignment? So there's life-giving work.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, when we are put in the position that God has called us to, where we're actually working, using our gifts, feeling so fulfilled because it's the most life-giving work possible when it's a God thing. I also think that maybe missional alignment as well could have a lot to do with it, where employees at Christian organizations, like just a church employee, for example, must deeply care about seeing lives transformed and that kind of thing. Do you think that plays into it as well?
I do. I think people are probably a little more aware of that, and if they're in particular sectors. So, for example, if they're in the Christian education sector, they're making a very deliberate decision to be missionally aligned and be in
Right.
Christian education. If they're deciding to work at a church, they're making a very definite decision. When we think of some of the nonprofits that we work with and support, sometimes people will join the nonprofit because it's in their community, or it has a job description they think that they fit. And often nonprofits will need to bring people along, to get to that mission alignment. And I had that experience when I worked at Prison Fellowship. People would come aboard because they matched the job description sometimes. And then we had to bring them along to the mission alignment, get them as enthusiastic as our program staff already was, the program staff who had those job descriptions to work with prisoners and their families. So it kind of depends on the sector, whether they come aboard, but absolutely letting a candidate know, what you do, and picking the ones that are excited and value aligned is awesome.
Yeah. And a 31% of engaged employee versus 58. That is a huge jump. Yeah. And I always say that, like, I think about 30% of Gallup's data shows 30% engaged. 70% means they're disengaged. That's amazing. So with our sectors combined, 58%.
And let's just point out one more thing. We find that when Christian-led organizations start taking our survey, they're pretty faithful. So they don't all start out at that 58%. They'll start out at 39%, 41%. So when we're bringing back this data, we're bringing back faithful, humble, leaders who are saying, I'll do this, I'll stay in it, I'll keep on doing it. So they're building it up. And so I just encourage anyone listening to this podcast who says, I know I'm not 58, I'm not going to compete. That's not the expectation. There's a starting point for everyone. And we do have organizations that start at that 30% mark.
Right.
So let's just keep in mind this big picture of these faithful leaders year after year working on their engagement.
Yeah, because we have about what, an 80+% renewal rate with our
Yes.
ministry partners, which means they're on a road. They're committed to
Right.
working on their employee engagement, employee well-being year after year, and that's where we see the greatest success. So that might have something to do as well with a much higher, engagement level. Is a large portion of organizations that work with us are committed to the process. The leaders care.
Yes.
Giselle, as you know, I oversee our marketing and sales,
Right.
and so with a lot of the sales inquiries that we get, especially first time ministry partners, sometimes they're in a bit of a triage mode. They're responding to problems. They're responding to a culture that's kind of gotten in a not so good place.
Right.
And here they are kind of realizing, oh boy, we better get on that road to flourishing.
Yes.
Um, and it kind of speaks to that versus organizations that have been on that road. It's a strategic initiative every single year to work on culture. That's going to lead to much better outcomes. So that
Yeah.
it's kind of like what the difference is between perhaps the secular world, Gallup's data versus our data. I'm curious about what's similar. What could be similar in terms of driving workplace culture and health
Right.
between secular organizations and ours? Any thoughts around that?
I think one thing that's really similar, well, actually two areas. So those of you that are familiar with our model, we use the Flourish model. So we have these 8 drivers of engagement, which are all demonstrated in the State of the Christian Workplace.
Yeah.
So think about the drivers around fantastic teams and
Mm-hmm.
uplifting growth. So teamwork makes the dream work, right? People join organizations and leave supervisors. We hear all these maxims all the time describing it. And I think they're true in every workplace. So if your team is just hard to work with, if your supervisor is hard to work with, then that is going to really affect you. Even if you care passionately about the mission, part of your effectiveness is going to be because of the team. And that's in every workplace that we see this. And then the areas about, am I growing? Am I learning? Am I getting new responsibilities? Are you delegating to me? Those are actions by the supervisors. And so, interestingly, we find that supervisors in Christian-led workplaces are usually less prepared than supervisors in the secular workplaces.
That's
They're
interesting.
often coming out of ministry work. They're often promoted from within, and they don't get that. And the corporate world realizes, hey, you don't make someone a supervisor without, preparing them to do that. Whereas we will move them upward. So the experiences that people have with their supervisor and their growing and developing, communicating with employees and the team dynamics, I'd say those are pretty similar. And they are actually super actionable to work on. I mentioned the area of life-giving work. I'd say that is very different. And then the inspirational leadership is also very different because we have leaders that are using the Bible and their Christian beliefs to guide the work that they're doing. So employees are having a very different experience with leaders.
Yeah, it's almost, you're almost describing um supervisors. You mentioned that they're not always as experienced, or maybe they don't have the same training as in the secular space. um and I think that even like that similarity of the need for healthy communication, inspirational leadership, uh um I guess my question, would you say that the challenges there, even though it's a Christian environment and they're Christian people and Christian leaders, the need for that, like, understanding of growing in those roles, improving in those roles, um, refining those leadership skills is equal, if not more prevalent in with Christian leadership? Or I don't
Yeah.
know, speak to that. 'Cause
Yeah. Well, a dynamic that we want to bring in as a spiritual element of the work, right? And we know that whenever your work is aimed at spreading the gospel, you're going to have a spiritual dynamic to the work. So when you ask, is it more needed? I say absolutely. And, it goes back to our very vision, right? That Christian-led workplaces should set the standard. It's the best, most effective places to work in the world. Well, how do you set the standard? And one of them is just a practical setting of the standard is that everyone should at least know what best practices are, what human beings need in a workplace, right? And so what we do find is that usually supervisors might be more spiritually equipped and they might have more spiritual training and background, but you get to just really practical things like how do you have a good team meeting? How frequently do you do one-on-ones? What does it look like to help a person on a development plan? They'll be, well, I don't have a clue how to do any of those things. And so we'll often find that, they're a little bit underprepared. But if you go back, to your original question, what would be the main difference between a Christian workplace and a secular workplace? But what would be the same? It's those needs, within teams, with my relationship with my supervisor. And those would be very probably common experiences.
Yeah. And so we likely have Christian leaders from a variety of different what we call sectors. So we might have church leaders listening in on this podcast. We might have higher ed, Christian schools, mission. And I think just for the sake of our audience, talk to me about how those drivers, our proprietary research-backed Flourish drivers, apply to every sector, even Christian-led business sector. It really is irrelevant what sector it is. Those drivers are at the core of what drives healthy workplace culture, and those principles apply across all sectors. I would say even the secular sector. Is that
absolutely
a safe analysis?
Absolutely. The very simply, we'll often say, well, trust is sort of the basis of engagement. Trust is the basis. And then we'll say, what is usually reflected in your level of trust? And we'll say it's really how healthy your communication is. And so we start with some real fundamentals that are the same in every single kind of organization. Never met an organization that said, oh, I don't care if we communicate around here. I don't care if I find out things by surprise. Doesn't matter if I know what I'm doing or my supervisor is around to talk to me. Doesn't matter. Have you ever heard that from anyone ever? Right? No. So, when you think of trust and you think of communication, and then you think, well, what am I going to be helping people with? Well, I'm helping people understand the very nature of their work. Where are we going? Our strategic direction. So as we put our drivers forward, they make sense to people. Sometimes I'll do a training with a group of interns and I'll say, what do you need in the workplace? And these are 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And you know what, Rob? They come up with our drivers. They've never heard of the word driver. They don't know statistical analysis. They don't even have workplace experience. Well, I need this kind of thing. And then we'll have a fun mapping exercise where it's like, look, you have identified the drivers. Congratulations. You are a PhD in industrial organizational psychology.
Yeah.
So they are very common. And our relative weights analysis, which we go into in the State of the Christian Workplace, really shows how important each of them are. And we do it across the sectors. So, interestingly, it would probably make sense to everyone listening, in the church sector, inspirational leadership is super big. Yeah. And then we get into the rescue mission sector, and you know what? Yeah. Life-giving work is more important. They want to see hands-on experience with transformed lives every day. So one of the really interesting parts of the report is going to be seeing those different sectors and those different weights. And for those of you that, aren't lit up with a big smile around statistics, that's okay, because it's full of graphics, full of
Yeah.
graphics, right?
Right. Yeah.
Where we demonstrate in a graphic way the importance. And so I think it's really cool for people to read this resource, and a lot of their intuition and their experience will be confirmed by what they're going to see.
Yeah, I agree. So if you have not downloaded the State of the Christian Workplace 2024 report, go to workplaces.org and you'll see a link there on our homepage. You can also go to our resources page and find it there. And what you're going to find, as Giselle said, is not just data, but that we brought our consultants in on this to provide a little bit of commentary, some context, some insights. And so I encourage you to download the report. You'll find your sector, whatever sector you're in, you'll find it in there in the report. It's a great place to start, just to understand a little bit about, what's going on in your sector and how workplace culture plays into different sectors. And there's a lot of really cool analysis in there, but it also just ultimately leads to this story and these insights of what God is revealing, the challenges and the way forward with improving workplace culture. So I'm excited, Giselle. I appreciate all of your insight, and I want to encourage everyone listening to subscribe to the podcast. We're going to be coming out with regular podcast episodes, and just go deeper into different elements of the report. Talk about what's kind of cutting edge, what's really relevant to you as a Christian leader. And we always say and always want to encourage Christian leaders to be courageous in the sense of invite data. Data is your best friend. Knowing what's really going on, the source of what is driving or preventing a healthier workplace culture, having that courage to look at that and understand what's going on underneath the hood, and then having the adventurous spirit to tackle some of those areas. And ultimately, the reason why we're so excited at Best Christian Workplaces in the work that we do is because we love to see kingdom impact. The outcome of a healthier workplace culture just leads ultimately to kingdom impact. And that's what we are so excited to see all around the world as ministry partners, improving, growing, and then ultimately that leads to drawing more people to Christ, a testimony for him, and all of these incredible kingdom-oriented organizations making a greater impact in the world. And I guess I'll leave that question to you, Giselle. I mean, in your experience as a consultant working with so many of our ministry partners, tell me about that kingdom impact and how you've seen the data and the consulting really drive an impact that's pretty exciting in the work that you've done.
Yeah. Well, if you think of the challenge of the kingdom work, how challenging it is, and then you think of the leader's own energy and passion and motivation to keep on going, challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge, and then you think of what might be continuing to put wind in their sails. And when they are leading a healthy workplace, Rob, they want to come to work. And I recently worked with an organization that had moved from the lowest level of engagement that we have up into what we call our flourishing. And this was a 5-year journey for them. And they were asking some more questions after an engagement survey because they saw a slip. And they said, we're never going back there because we like coming to work now. Our work gives us life now. So they had gone through the troubled times. They had moved into the flourishing times, and they were going to keep doing all that work to stay there. And then the next week I went to another organization that was in that low area, and I was able to share that story and I say to them, you will like coming to work in a couple of years. And you saw their faces like, is it possible? Is it possible? So I think that the leaders have the passion for their mission impact. They have the desire. God has called them into the position. And sometimes they are in a fractured situation where they know that if they can get to this flourishing, they're going to have a bigger impact, and they will, and they'll like coming to work. So what could be better than that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess I would just like to say, as we wrap up this first episode, to Christian leaders, as Giselle just said, don't grow weary in well doing. As you are navigating culture, just know that there are tools, there's an approach, there's a way to really understand what's going on, and then have actionable plans to move the needle in a positive direction. No matter how toxic or unhealthy a culture might be, you can move it forward as a leader. You just got to be committed to the process and have the tools that you need to not only know what's going on, but begin to implement those things. So with that, go to workplaces.org. Again, download the report. It's free. It's available to everyone. And thank you, Giselle, for talking with us and sharing your insights as always. And God bless you all. And we'll see you on the next episode of the State of the Christian Workplace Report.